Get security. Get her off my plane. Now.
You need to explain yourself right
Captain
now.
Alexander Reynolds' voice sliced through the cabin like ice, breaking his finger rigid as a weapon pointing at the black woman in seat 2A. The first-class cabin froze. Conversations died mid-sentence. A businessman in 3C lowered his newspaper. A flight attendant paused, drink cart half extended. Every eye turned to witness the collision of power and prejudice unfolding in the premium cabin. Dr. Gabrielle Montgomery didn't flinch, didn't raise her voice, didn't break eye contact. 3 days without sleep had left her exhausted, but 20 years battling institutional bias had taught her something more valuable than outrage: strategic patience. Her hands remained steady on her laptop as she saved the document she'd been working on, a federal inspection report with the power to ground entire fleets. Captain Reynolds saw a threat, a disruption, someone who didn't belong in his kingdom at 30,000 feet. What he failed to recognize was that the woman he was attempting to remove wasn't just a passenger in his aircraft. She was the one person with the authority to remove him from the sky permanently. And in exactly 12 minutes, that's exactly what she was going to do. The sterile recycled air of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport was thick with the scent of Cinnabon and jet fuel. It was 8:05 p.m., and the terminal was a frantic river of humanity. Dr. Gabrielle Montgomery navigated the current with the practiced ease of a career traveler, her roller bag clicking a steady rhythm on the tile. She was exhausted. Not just long day tired, but bone-deep weariness that came from 72 straight hours of high-stakes work. She moved like a ghost, blending into the crowd in her simple tailored black trousers, silk blouse, and a worn but expensive linen blazer. The only thing that hinted at her profession was the heavy government-issue laptop bag slung over her shoulder and the piercing intelligence in her eyes. Eyes that had just spent 3 days scrutinizing aircraft maintenance logs, ramp procedures, and crew compliance for a major carrier. She was the person airlines prayed never showed up unannounced. Her destination was Transcontinental Airways Flight 847, non-stop from Atlanta to London Heathrow. It was her flight home. She was based in the London office of the Federal Aviation Administration. Gabrielle checked her watch. The boarding would begin in 20 minutes. Just enough time to review her notes on the inspection she'd completed. She found an empty seat near the gate and pulled out her personal tablet. The government laptop stayed locked in her carry-on. That one contained the official findings that would eventually make their way to the desks of airline executives and federal regulators. Her inspection had uncovered concerning patterns, maintenance schedules manipulated to keep aircraft flying despite needed repairs, crew hour logs that mysteriously reset after 11-hour shifts, and ramp safety protocols ignored during rush periods. None of it was catastrophic on its own, but together they painted a picture of a company that prioritized profits over safety. Transcontinental Airways had some explaining to do. The gate agent's voice crackled over the speaker. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We will now begin boarding Transcontinental Airways Flight 847 to London Heathrow. We invite our first-class passengers, Platinum and Diamond members, and passengers needing special assistance to board at this time." Gabrielle tucked away her tablet, gathered her belongings, and joined the priority line. She didn't fly first class often. Government budget constraints usually meant economy. But after 72 hours of intense work, she'd used her personal miles to upgrade. Tonight, she needed the space and quiet that first class provided. Tonight, she was simply a passenger heading home. She had no idea that this routine flight was about to become the flashpoint for the biggest aviation discrimination case in a decade. Gabrielle approached the gate with her digital boarding pass ready on her phone. The gate agent, a man whose name tag read Thomas Wilson, glanced up with the practiced efficiency of someone who processed hundreds of passengers daily. "Good evening, ma'am. May I see your boarding pass and ID, please?" Gabrielle presented both. Thomas scanned her pass, his eyes briefly registering surprise at her first-class seat assignment before his professional demeanor reasserted itself. "Thank you, Dr. Montgomery. You're all set. Seat 2A. Enjoy your flight." "Thank you," she replied, already moving toward the jet bridge. The walk down the jet bridge was a transitional space from the chaotic energy of the terminal to the controlled environment of the aircraft. Gabrielle used these moments to shift her mental state. For 3 days, she'd been Dr. Montgomery, FAA inspector, sharp-eyed and uncompromising. Now she needed to become just another passenger, seeking nothing more than a quiet flight and some much-needed rest. At the aircraft door stood a flight attendant with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her name tag read Diana Vasquez. "Welcome aboard." Diana said, her gaze sweeping over Gabrielle in a quick assessment. Her eyes lingered a moment too long on Gabrielle's simple clothing, then flicked down to the first-class ticket on Gabrielle's phone. Something shifted in her expression, a barely perceptible hardening around the mouth, a slight narrowing of the eyes. "First class?" Diana asked, her tone carrying a hint of disbelief. "Yes," Gabrielle replied simply, holding up her phone. "2A." Diana leaned in, examining the digital boarding pass for an unnecessarily long time as though searching for some discrepancy. "Let me see that again, dear." The word dear landed with patronizing weight. Gabrielle maintained her composure, holding the phone steady as Diana scrutinized it once more. "Right this way," Diana finally said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Can I help you with that bag? It looks quite heavy." "I can manage," Gabrielle replied, already moving past her. She'd seen that look countless times throughout her career. It was the look of someone recalculating their entire world view because a square peg, a black woman, was appearing in a round, first-class shaped hole. It was the microaggression dance she'd learned to navigate decades ago, the extra verification, the faux concern, the subtle implication that she was somehow out of place. Gabrielle found 2A, a luxurious pod by the window, and skillfully stowed her roller bag in the overhead bin. She slid into the seat, the leather sighing around her. She pulled out her personal tablet again, not the government-issued one which remained locked in her carry-on, but her own device. She had personal emails to catch up on before takeoff. The first-class cabin filled gradually. A silver-haired executive in an expensive suit took 1D. A young couple, clearly honeymooners by their matching rings and constant touching, settled into 3E and 3F. An older woman with perfectly coiffed hair and a small dog in a carrier claimed 1A. Gabrielle was already absorbed in her work, her fingers flying across the screen. She was so focused that she didn't immediately notice the white uniformed figure emerging from the cockpit. Captain Alexander Reynolds was a man who commanded attention. 6'2" with silver temples and the straight-backed posture of his military days, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had spent 3 decades in the air. To him, the aircraft wasn't simply a public conveyance. It was his domain, his command center, his responsibility. And he took that responsibility very seriously. Reynolds was conducting his pre-flight cabin inspection, a ritual he considered essential. It wasn't just about safety checks. It was about establishing presence, letting passengers feel the reassuring authority of their captain. He nodded to the executive in 1D, exchanged pleasantries with the older woman in 1A, welcomed the honeymooners with a warm smile. Then his gaze fell on Gabrielle. The first-class cabin of a Transcontinental Airways Boeing 787 was designed to evoke exclusivity. Soft lighting, wide leather seats that transformed into fully flat beds, real glassware instead of plastic cups, and attentive service that anticipated needs before they arose. It was a space where passengers expected a certain level of refinement and where the crew expected a certain type of passenger. Gabrielle settled deeper into her seat, appreciating the extra legroom and privacy. Around her, the cabin continued to fill with its typical clientele, predominantly white, predominantly male, predominantly wealthy. A woman in a St. John suit took 4A, immediately requesting champagne. 2 middle-aged men in matching golf polos claimed 5D and 5F, loudly discussing their recent business acquisition. An older gentleman with a silver beard and kind eyes took 3B, quietly arranging his reading materials. The sounds of the boarding process created a familiar symphony, The thunk of overhead bins, the rustle of passengers settling in the ping of call buttons, and the hushed professional tones of the flight attendants. Diana moved through the cabin with practiced efficiency, taking drink orders and hanging jackets with mechanical precision. Captain Reynolds emerged from the cockpit, his crisp white uniform a stark contrast against the cabin's muted color palette. His presence immediately commanded attention. Passengers instinctively straightened, conversations quieted. Reynolds nodded approvingly at familiar faces. He prided himself on recognizing frequent flyers. This was his pre-flight ritual, a visual inspection of his domain before takeoff. He checked exit rows, glanced at cabin preparations, and established his authority through presence alone. After 30 years of flying, Reynolds believed he could sense when something was off in his aircraft. Today, something felt off. His gaze swept across the first-class cabin and stopped at seat 2A. Reynolds paused momentarily, confused by what he saw: a black woman dressed simply intensely focused on a tablet. She wasn't looking up at him. She wasn't acknowledging his presence. She was typing, oblivious to his authority. Reynolds frowned slightly. In his mental catalog of first-class passengers, she didn't fit the pattern. No designer luggage, no obvious displays of wealth, no deferential smile at his approach. Just focused work and a government-issue laptop bag partially visible beneath the seat. He glanced at the empty seat beside her, then back at the woman. Something didn't add up in his mind. First class was his domain, and he knew the types who belonged there. This passenger was an anomaly, a disruption to his orderly world. Reynolds made his way back to the galley where Diana was preparing pre-departure beverages. "Who's in 2A?" he asked quietly, nodding his head in Gabrielle's direction. Diana's professional smile faltered, replaced by a conspiratorial look. "That's what I was wondering, Captain. She claims it's her seat. I checked her pass, it says 2A. But Reynolds prompted, sensing Diana's unspoken reservation. "But she doesn't seem like our usual first-class profile," Diana replied, her voice low. "And that bag she's carrying looks like government issue. Could be an employee trying to upgrade without authorization." Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. He'd seen it before: airline employees from partner carriers trying to use buddy passes to access premium cabins passengers with fraudulently obtained upgrades, even cases of stolen frequent flyer accounts. As captain, he considered it his responsibility to maintain the integrity of the cabin classes. "I'll handle this," he said with quiet authority. "We can't have unauthorized upgrades. It's not fair to paying passengers." Diana nodded approvingly as Reynolds straightened his uniform and walked deliberately toward seat 2A. What neither of them realized was that their shared assumptions were about to collide with a reality far different from what they imagined, and with consequences neither could anticipate. Captain Reynolds approached seat 2A with the confidence of someone who rarely had his authority questioned. He stood beside Gabrielle's seat, waiting for her to acknowledge him. When she remained focused on her work, he cleared his throat. "Excuse me, miss." Gabrielle continued typing, deeply absorbed in her task. "Excuse me," Reynolds repeated louder, this time his voice edged with impatience. Gabrielle finally looked up, pulling her focus from her work. She saw a captain in full uniform, his posture rigid with authority. "Yes, Captain. Can I help you?" Her tone was polite, but not deferential. "I'm Captain Reynolds." "I need to see your boarding pass," he said. It wasn't a request. It was a command. Gabrielle blinked once, processing the demand. "I've already shown it at the gate and to the flight attendant." "And now you'll show it to me," Reynolds replied, his voice flat. "There seems to be a discrepancy with our manifest." A lie. A blatant, lazy lie that Gabrielle had heard in various forms throughout her career. With a small sigh, she picked up her phone, unlocked it, and displayed the screen. "Dr. Gabrielle Montgomery, seat 2A, flight 847 to London." Reynolds barely glanced at it. "That's what it says," but I'm afraid there's been a mistake. This seat is reserved." Gabrielle's exhaustion was suddenly pierced by a familiar surge of adrenaline. "A mistake. Captain, I am a ticketed passenger. This is my assigned seat. This is a premium cabin," Miss Reynolds said, his voice dropping into a patronizing drawl. "Perhaps you were supposed to be in 22A, not 2A." The implication was clear and ugly. She was either too unintelligent to read her ticket correctly, or too poor to be where she was seated. Around them, conversations quieted as other passengers began to take notice of the interaction. Captain Gabrielle said, her voice becoming dangerously quiet. "Are you implying I can't read or that I can't afford this ticket?" "Because I assure you my ticket is valid." Reynolds's face hardened. He was not accustomed to being challenged, especially not in front of other passengers. "What I'm implying, ma'am, is that you are not in the correct seat. Now I'm going to ask you politely one more time. Please gather your belongings and come with me to the galley so we can sort this out." "There is nothing to sort out," Gabrielle replied, her patience wearing thin. "I am in my ticketed seat. I will not be moving." The silver-bearded man in 3B leaned forward slightly. "Captain, the lady showed you her boarding pass. What's the problem here?" Reynolds's head whipped around. "Sir, this is a matter of aircraft safety and security. Please stay out of it." He turned back to Gabrielle, his face now a mask of cold fury. "Ma'am, you are now failing to comply with flight crew instructions. That is a federal offense." Gabrielle nearly laughed at the irony. He was lecturing her on federal offenses. "The only person failing their duties here, Captain, is you," she replied calmly. "You are harassing a paying passenger based on what exactly? A hunch. An assumption." That was it. Reynolds' face flushed red. His authority had been publicly questioned, his judgment challenged. He straightened to his full height and turned sharply toward the galley. "Diana," he snapped. Diana appeared at his side instantly. "Yes, Captain. This passenger is creating a disturbance. She refuses to comply with crew instructions. Call airport security immediately." Diana's eyes widened slightly, but she nodded. "Right away, Captain." As Diana moved toward the aircraft phone, whispers rippled through the first-class cabin. The honeymooners exchanged concerned glances. The executive in 1D frowned deeply. The silver-bearded man in 3B pulled out his phone and began typing. Gabrielle remained seated outwardly calm despite the storm brewing inside her. She had faced this kind of treatment before, but never with such formal authority behind it. She watched Diana speaking quietly into the phone, occasionally glancing in her direction with thinly veiled satisfaction. Reynolds stood beside her seat, arms crossed, a sentinel of misplaced authority. "Security will escort you off this aircraft," he informed her. "I suggest you cooperate to avoid further charges." Captain Reynolds Gabrielle replied evenly, "I strongly suggest you reconsider this course of action. There will be consequences." Reynolds scoffed. "The consequence will be your removal from this flight, ma'am. My aircraft, my decision." A younger flight attendant with a name tag reading Sofia Rodriguez approached cautiously. "Captain," she said quietly, "are you sure this is necessary? Her boarding pass?" "Not now." Rodriguez Reynolds cut her off sharply. "This is a security matter." Sophia retreated, but not before giving Gabrielle an apologetic look. From the front of the cabin, Diana announced with poorly concealed smugness, "Security is on their way." The tension in the cabin was palpable now. Other passengers were openly staring. Some had phones raised recording the unfolding scene. Gabrielle noticed the silver-bearded man was now on his phone speaking quietly but intensely. First Officer James Cooper emerged from the cockpit, his expression concerned. "Captain? What's going on?" "Passenger. Refusing to comply with instructions," Reynolds replied curtly. "Security is handling it." Cooper glanced at Gabrielle, then back at Reynolds, doubt evident in his eyes. "Sir, perhaps we should return to the cockpit. Cooper Reynolds ordered. "Complete the pre-flight checks. We're already behind schedule." Cooper hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, but military habits die hard. He gave a short nod and retreated to the cockpit, casting one last uncertain look at Gabrielle. The familiar blue uniforms of airport security appeared at the aircraft door. 2 officers stepped into the cabin, a tall white man with graying hair and a Hispanic woman with her hair pulled back in a tight bun. Captain Reynolds's posture relaxed slightly. The authorities were here. Order would be restored. His authority would be upheld. What he didn't know was that the real authority on this aircraft was sitting quietly in seat 2A, watching his career unravel with each misguided decision. "Officers, thank you for coming," Reynolds said with evident relief. "This passenger is refusing to comply with crew instructions and creating a disturbance." The male security officer, whose badge identified him as Bradley Thompson, nodded professionally. "We'll handle it from here, Captain." His partner, Officer Nicole Martinez, approached Gabrielle with a neutral expression. "Ma'am, I understand there's an issue with your seating assignment." Gabrielle looked directly at Officer Martinez. "There is no issue with my seating assignment. I am in my assigned seat 2A, as my boarding pass clearly shows. The captain approached me, demanded to see my boarding pass after I'd already shown it twice, then insisted there was a mistake, despite evidence to the contrary." Martinez's expression remained professional, but her eyes registered the inconsistency. "May I see your boarding pass, please?" "Of course." Gabrielle displayed her phone again. Martinez studied it carefully, then turned to Reynolds. "Captain, her boarding pass clearly shows seat 2A. What's the discrepancy you mentioned?" Reynolds' confidence wavered slightly. "It's not about the boarding pass itself. It's about whether she belongs in this cabin at all. We have protocols about what Captain the silver-bearded man from 3B interrupted, rising to his feet. About who looks like they belong in first class. I fly this route twice monthly, and I've never seen you question anyone else's seating assignment." "Sir, please stay seated," Officer Thompson directed. "My name is Martin Sullivan." The silver-bearded man continued, ignoring Thompson. "I'm a retired federal judge, and what I'm witnessing is textbook discrimination." Reynolds' face flushed. "This has nothing to do with—" "It has everything to do with it," Sullivan interrupted again. "You never asked to see my boarding pass. Or his," he pointed to the executive in 1D. "Or theirs," he nodded toward the honeymooners. "Only hers." Other passengers murmured in agreement. Phones continued recording. The atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Officer Thompson tried to regain control of the situation. "Let's all calm down. Captain, what specific airline policy has this passenger violated?" Reynolds straightened his uniform jacket. She refused a direct instruction from the captain to relocate to the galley to discuss the seating issue. "Because there is no seating issue," Gabrielle stated firmly. "Captain Reynolds was attempting to remove me from a seat I paid for without cause." The younger flight attendant, Sophia, stepped forward hesitantly. "Officers, I can confirm the passenger's boarding pass is valid for seat 2A. Diana shot her a warning look. "Sophia, this isn't your concern. It is when we're treating passengers unfairly," Sophia replied quietly. Martinez turned back to Gabrielle. "Ma'am, may I see your ID as well, please?" Gabrielle produced her driver's license. As Martinez examined it, Reynolds interjected. "This isn't about her identification. This is about maintaining order on my aircraft. As captain, I have final authority over who flies and where they sit." "Your authority isn't absolute." Captain Gabrielle finally said, her voice carrying the weight of professional knowledge. "It's bounded by federal regulations, airline policies, and civil rights laws. You have no valid reason to question my seating assignment." Reynolds' patience snapped. "The reason is that you don't fit the profile of—" He caught himself, but too late. The cabin went silent. Even Diana looked uncomfortable with what he'd almost said aloud. The profile of what Captain Gabrielle asked, her voice deadly calm. Please, finish your statement for the officers. And for all these passengers recording this interaction. Reynolds realized he had backed himself into a corner. The profile of passengers who typically... That is, there are security concerns that... What Captain Reynolds is struggling to articulate. Martin Sullivan interjected is that Dr. Montgomery doesn't look like his mental image of a first-class passenger. And we all know why. Officer Martinez, sensing the situation deteriorating rapidly, turned to her partner. Thompson, let's take this conversation to the jet bridge. Thompson nodded. Captain Dr. Montgomery, would you both please step outside with us to resolve this matter? I'm not leaving my seat, Gabrielle stated firmly. I've done nothing wrong, broken no rules. The captain is the one making unfounded accusations. Ma'am Thompson began, his tone hardening. Actually, Gabrielle said, reaching into her bag, there's something you should see first. She withdrew a leather credential wallet and opened it, revealing a federal badge and ID card. I'm Dr. Gabrielle Montgomery, Senior Aviation Safety Inspector for the Federal Aviation Administration, London office. And this, she gestured around the cabin, is now officially part of an FAA investigation into discriminatory practices. The cabin erupted in shocked murmurs. Reynolds's face drained of color. Diana froze in the galley doorway. Even the security officers seemed momentarily at a loss. Captain Reynolds, Gabrielle continued, her voice now carrying unmistakable authority. I suggest we continue this conversation in the jet bridge as the officers proposed. Unless you'd prefer I contact the FAA regional director right now. Reynolds, suddenly looking decades older, nodded stiffly. The jet bridge would be appropriate. As Gabrielle stood and gathered her tablet, passengers began to applaud. Martin Sullivan gave her a respectful nod. The executive in 1D looked impressed. The honeymooners exchanged wide-eyed glances. Officer Martinez led the way to the aircraft door, followed by Reynolds, then Gabrielle, with Thompson bringing up the rear. As they stepped onto the jet bridge, the door closed behind them, muffling the continued conversations in the cabin. But the real confrontation was just beginning. In the confined space of the jet bridge, the tension was palpable. Captain Reynolds stood with his back straight, his face a mask of professional composure despite the pallor that had overtaken it moments earlier. Officer Thompson positioned himself near the aircraft door, while Officer Martinez stood closer to the terminal entrance. Gabrielle remained calm at the center of this triangle of authority, her FAA credentials still in hand. Dr. Montgomery, Officer Martinez began. I apologize for the confusion. Had we known you were with the FAA, my employment status is irrelevant to how I should be treated, Gabrielle interrupted firmly. Every passenger deserves respect and fair treatment regardless of who they are. The fact that I'm an FAA inspector doesn't make Captain Reynolds' behavior more unacceptable. It simply means there will be formal consequences. Reynolds cleared his throat. Dr. Montgomery, there's clearly been a misunderstanding. As captain, I'm responsible for security, and when Diana raised concerns... What concerns exactly? Gabrielle asked sharply. What specific security protocol did I violate by sitting in my assigned seat? Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. It wasn't a specific protocol, but an assessment based on experience. When something doesn't seem right? When someone doesn't seem right, you mean, Gabrielle corrected. Let's be precise with our language, Captain. You decided I didn't belong in first class based solely on my appearance. You lied about a manifest discrepancy. You threatened me with federal charges for refusing to give up a seat I paid for. None of those actions have anything to do with security. Officer Thompson stepped forward. Dr. Montgomery, what would you like to happen now? Inside the aircraft, the situation was evolving rapidly. After the revelation of Gabrielle's identity, the first-class cabin had erupted into a buzz of conversation and activity. Sofia Rodriguez, the younger flight attendant, was visibly distressed. She approached Diana, who was hurriedly speaking into the aircraft phone. "Diana, what are you doing?" Sophia asked. "Calling operations." "We need guidance on how to proceed," Diana replied tersely. "We've humiliated a federal inspector," Sophia said. "This is going to be a disaster for the airline." Diana covered the mouthpiece. "This is Reynolds' mess, not mine. I'm documenting that I followed Captain's orders." Martin Sullivan was still on his phone, speaking quietly but intensely. "Yes, Laura, I'm witnessing it firsthand. Clear discrimination followed by attempted removal. Yes, I'm recording. The FAA inspector just revealed herself, but that's beside the point. Exactly, it wouldn't matter if she were an ordinary passenger." "I think this case has legs." The executive in 1D approached the galley. "Is the captain serious? We're going to be delayed because he tried to remove a passenger who had a valid ticket." First Officer James Cooper re-emerged from the cockpit looking concerned. "What's happening? Where's the captain?" Diana gestured toward the jet bridge. "Security is talking with him and the passenger." "What passenger?" Cooper asked. Sophia stepped forward. "The woman in 2A. The captain tried to remove her because he thought she didn't belong in first class. Turns out she's an FAA inspector." Cooper's face fell. "Oh no." "Oh yes," Martin Sullivan chimed in, having ended his phone call. "And as a retired federal judge, I can tell you this is going to be a legal nightmare for your airline." "Was anyone else questioned about their seating assignment?" Cooper asked the cabin generally. "No," came multiple responses. Cooper ran a hand through his hair. "I tried to tell him. This isn't the first time he's done something like this." That caught everyone's attention. "What do you mean this isn't the first time?" Sullivan asked sharply. Cooper looked like he regretted speaking. "I should check on the captain." As Cooper moved toward the aircraft door, more passengers from the main cabin had begun to notice the commotion. A young woman in row 12 was live-streaming the scene, narrating quietly. "So the captain just tried to kick a black woman out of first class, and it turns out she's some kind of federal agent. Everyone's freaking out." Back in the jet bridge, Gabrielle was calmly laying out the situation. "Here's what's going to happen," she said. "I am going to call my director to report this incident and initiate a formal investigation. Captain Reynolds will be removed from this flight as he has demonstrated poor judgment and potential bias that compromises safety. I will return to my seat and continue to London, where I will file a complete report." "You can't remove me from my own flight," Reynolds protested. "I'm the captain. This is my aircraft." "It's Transcontinental Airways aircraft," Gabrielle corrected. "And as an FAA inspector, I have the authority to ground any pilot I deem a safety risk. Discrimination is a safety issue, Captain Reynolds. It reflects poor decision-making and creates an unsafe environment for passengers and crew." "This is absurd," Reynolds said, his voice rising. "One misunderstanding and—" "This wasn't a misunderstanding," Gabrielle cut him off. "This was a calculated attempt to humiliate and remove a passenger based on prejudice. And I suspect it's not the first time." The jet bridge door opened, and First Officer Cooper stepped out. "Captain, is everything all right?" Reynolds turned to his first officer. Cooper returned to the cockpit. "This doesn't concern you." "Actually, it does," Gabrielle interjected. "First Officer Cooper, I'm Dr. Montgomery from the FAA. Given the current situation, I'll need to ask you a few questions." Cooper looked between Reynolds and Gabrielle, conflict evident on his face. What questions have you witnessed Captain Reynolds questioning passengers about their seating assignments?" Before Cooper hesitated. "Loyalty warring with honesty." "You're under no obligation to answer that," Reynolds said sharply. "Actually, he is," Gabrielle countered. "Interfering with an FAA investigation is grounds for license revocation." Cooper swallowed hard. "There have been similar incidents." Reynolds' face hardened. "Cooper, That's enough. How many incidents? Gabrielle pressed. 3 that I've personally witnessed, Cooper admitted, all involving passengers of color in premium cabins. The revelation hung in the air like a physical presence. Officer Martinez exchanged a look with Thompson. Reynolds' jaw clenched visibly. "Thank you for your honesty, First Officer," Gabrielle said. She pulled out her phone. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to call my director." The atmosphere in the jet bridge grew increasingly tense as Gabrielle dialed her phone. Captain Reynolds stood rigidly, his face a mask of contained fury. First Officer Cooper hovered uncertainly near the aircraft door, caught between professional loyalty and ethical responsibility. Officers Thompson and Martinez maintained their positions, watching the situation unfold with professional detachment. "Michael, it's Gabrielle," she spoke into the phone. "I'm at Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson, about to board Flight 847 to London. There's been an incident." She proceeded to outline the situation succinctly, her voice calm and factual. "The captain attempted to remove me from my first-class seat despite having a valid ticket. When I refused, he called security, claiming I was disruptive. First Officer Cooper has just confirmed this isn't the first such incident." She listened for a moment. "Yes, I've identified myself as FAA. No, I don't believe I can continue on this flight with Captain Reynolds commanding. Correct safety concerns due to judgment issues. I'll need authorization to remove him from duty pending investigation." Reynolds' face grew increasingly pale as the reality of his situation became clear. "Understood. I'll await your call with the confirmation." Gabrielle ended the call and turned to the group. "My director is contacting Transcontinental Airways' VP of Operations. Captain Reynolds will be removed from this flight pending investigation." "This is outrageous," Reynolds sputtered. "You can't just—" "I can, and I am." Gabrielle interrupted. "This isn't personal, Captain. It's procedural. When a pilot demonstrates potentially biased decision-making, it raises legitimate safety concerns." Officer Thompson cleared his throat. "Dr. Montgomery, from a security standpoint, we need to know how you'd like to proceed. Do you want to file a formal complaint about the captain's behavior?" "The FAA investigation will cover that," Gabrielle replied. "My immediate concern is ensuring this flight continues safely to London. First Officer Cooper, is there a relief captain available?" Before Cooper could answer, the jet bridge door opened again, and Diana Vasquez stepped out. "Captain Operations is on the line. They're asking for you urgently." Reynolds glared at Gabrielle before stepping back toward the aircraft. "This isn't over." "For today's flight, it is," Gabrielle replied calmly. As Reynolds disappeared back into the aircraft, Officer Martinez approached Gabrielle. "Dr. Montgomery, I apologize for how this situation was handled. When we receive calls about unruly passengers, we have to respond, but clearly I wasn't unruly," Gabrielle corrected. "I was simply existing in a space where Captain Reynolds didn't think I belonged. Your response wasn't the problem. The call itself was." Martinez nodded. "Still, we should have assessed the situation more thoroughly before intervening." Thompson joined them. "We'll need to file a report about this incident. Would you be willing to provide a statement?" "Of course," Gabrielle agreed. "But my priority right now is ensuring this flight departs with a qualified captain." Cooper, who had been hovering nearby, stepped forward. "Dr. Montgomery, I want to apologize. I should have spoken up sooner when I saw what was happening. Why didn't you, Gabrielle, ask directly?" Cooper looked down. "Captain Reynolds has been flying for 30 years. He's respected, decorated. I'm just a first officer with 5 years' experience. Who would listen to me? The truth doesn't care about rank." "First Officer Cooper," Gabrielle said. "Remember that next time." Inside the aircraft, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Reynolds was in the galley, speaking tersely into the aircraft phone. "Sir, this is completely unprecedented. Yes, I understand she's FAA, but—" "No, I was following security protocols." "What do you mean, step down?" The passengers watched this drama unfold with rapt attention. Martin Sullivan had moved to the front row to better observe. Sophia was attempting to maintain some semblance of normal service, offering drinks to distract from the tension. Diana hovered near the cockpit, her earlier confidence replaced by visible anxiety. She approached Sophia. "This is a disaster," she whispered. "If Reynolds gets removed, we'll be stuck here for hours waiting for a replacement captain." "Maybe you should have thought of that before backing him up," Sophia replied coldly. "I told you both her ticket was valid. I was just following the captain's lead," Diana protested. "And that's exactly the problem," Martin Sullivan interjected, having overheard their conversation. "The just following orders defense wasn't acceptable at Nuremberg, and it's not acceptable at 30,000 feet. Diana blanched. "That's not a fair comparison." "Isn't it?" Sullivan challenged. "You were willing to participate in humiliating and removing a passenger based solely on her appearance. Where would you draw the line?" Before Diana could respond, Reynolds emerged from the galley, his face ashen. He walked stiffly to the cockpit without making eye contact with any passengers. Moments later, he re-emerged with his small flight bag. "Cooper," he called sharply. "Cockpit. Now." As Cooper hurried past, Reynolds turned to Diana. "Operations is sending Captain Morales as my replacement. She should be here within 30 minutes. Without another word, he exited the aircraft, leaving a wake of whispers and shocked expressions. The jet bridge door opened once more, and Gabrielle re-entered the cabin. A spontaneous round of applause erupted from the passengers. Gabrielle acknowledged it with a small nod before returning to her seat. Officer Martinez followed her to the edge of the cabin. "Dr. Montgomery, we've completed our report. Thank you for your cooperation." "Thank you, officers," Gabrielle replied. "I appreciate your professionalism." As the security officers departed, Diana approached Gabrielle's seat, her demeanor completely transformed. "Dr. Montgomery, on behalf of Transcontinental Airways, I want to apologize for the misunderstanding and any inconvenience." "This wasn't a misunderstanding," Ms. Vasquez Gabrielle interrupted. "And let's not pretend you weren't an active participant. We'll address that during the investigation." Diana's professional mask slipped momentarily, revealing a flash of fear. "Investigation? Did you think there wouldn't be consequences?" Gabrielle asked. "Captain Reynolds has been removed, but this issue extends beyond a single individual. It's about a pattern of behavior that you enabled and participated in." Diana retreated without another word, her face pale. She retreated to the galley where Sophia was watching with undisguised disapproval. Martin Sullivan leaned across the aisle. "Dr. Montgomery Martin Sullivan, I'm a retired federal judge. What you did took courage. It shouldn't require courage to sit in a seat you paid for." "Judge Sullivan," Gabrielle replied. Sullivan nodded solemnly. "No, it shouldn't. But the world we have isn't always the world we deserve." The aircraft announcement system chimed, and First Officer Cooper's voice came through. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is First Officer Cooper speaking. We apologize for the delay. We're awaiting the arrival of Captain Morales, who should be here within 30 minutes. We appreciate your patience and understanding." As the announcement ended, passengers began discussing the situation openly. The story was already spreading throughout the aircraft, with people from the main cabin coming forward to see the woman who had stood up to the captain. In the cockpit, Cooper sat alone staring at the controls. His hands were shaking slightly. He had just participated in the removal of his captain, a man he had respected and admired. Yet he couldn't deny the relief he felt. The weight of complicity had been lifted from his shoulders. For 3 years, he had witnessed Reynolds' subtle discrimination against passengers and crew. 3 years of saying nothing, doing nothing, being nothing more than a silent enabler. Today, that had changed. Today, he had finally told the truth. Cooper reached for the logbook to make the official entry: Captain A. Reynolds removed from duty by FAA inspector due to safety concerns. Replacement captain en route. The simple act of writing those words felt like both a betrayal and a redemption. The atmosphere in Chicago O'Hare's Terminal 3 had the controlled chaos typical of major international airports. Travelers moved purposefully between gates. Digital displays, updated flight statuses, and the ambient hum of conversations in multiple languages created a backdrop of global connection. Dr. Gabrielle Montgomery moved through this familiar landscape with the practiced efficiency of a career traveler. After 3 days of meetings at FAA headquarters in Washington, she was returning to London on Transcontinental Airways Flight 847, the same route number, though not the same aircraft as the flight that had changed the trajectory of her career 2 years earlier. At the premium check-in counter, she was greeted by a young agent whose name tag read Michael. "Good afternoon, Dr. Montgomery," he said after checking her identification. "Everything is set for your flight to London. Boarding will begin in approximately 45 minutes at Gate K-12. "Thank you, Michael," Gabrielle replied, accepting her boarding pass. As she moved toward security, she noticed something that would have been unremarkable to most observers, but represented significant progress to her trained eye. The diversity of passengers in the premium lines mirrored the general passenger population. Black, white, Asian, Latino, Middle Eastern travelers all moved through the priority lanes without the extra scrutiny or questioning that had once been commonplace for those who didn't fit certain expectations. This subtle but meaningful change was one of many that had transformed the passenger experience over the past 2 years. The standards implemented following the Transcontinental investigation had established clearer expectations for how airlines treated all passengers regardless of appearance or background. While incidents still occurred, they were now exceptions rather than patterns addressed through established procedures rather than dismissed as misunderstandings. After clearing security, Gabrielle made her way to Gate K-12 where Flight 847 was preparing for boarding. The gate area reflected another aspect of the industry's transformation signage and announcements in multiple languages, service animals accommodated without fuss. Passengers with mobility challenges assisted efficiently and respectfully. Gabrielle took a seat near the boarding area, opening her tablet to review notes from her Washington meetings. The FAA's commitment to maintaining and expanding the discrimination standards remained strong, with additional resources allocated for monitoring implementation and addressing emerging challenges. Dr. Montgomery. She looked up to see a Transcontinental Airways representative approaching with a professional smile. "Yes, I'm Sarah Evans, Customer Experience Director for Transcontinental's Chicago hub. We received notification that you would be traveling with us today. Captain Morales asked me to extend his personal welcome and to see if you need anything before boarding." "Captain Morales," Gabrielle asked, recognizing the name. Letitia Morales. She was the replacement captain on that flight 2 years ago. "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "She specifically requested to pilot today's flight when she saw your name on the manifest. She mentioned that it felt appropriate to come full circle." This thoughtful gesture touched Gabrielle more than she expected. "Please thank Captain Morales for me. I don't need anything special, but I appreciate the consideration." As boarding time approached, Gabrielle joined the queue for premium passengers. When her turn came, she presented her boarding pass to the gate agent, who scanned it with a smile and a nod. "Thank you, Dr. Montgomery. Enjoy your flight." The simple transaction being processed with the same efficiency and courtesy extended to all passengers represented progress in itself. No extra scrutiny, no questioning glances, no subtle implications that she might not belong in the premium cabin. Just routine professionalism. As she walked down the jet bridge, Gabrielle found herself reflecting on how much had changed since that pivotal flight 2 years earlier. The industry standards implemented following the investigation had established clearer expectations and accountability mechanisms. Airlines had revised their training programs, complaint procedures, and performance metrics. Most importantly, a culture that had once enabled discriminatory treatment through silence and minimization had begun to transform into one that recognized equal dignity as a fundamental aspect of safety and service. At the aircraft door stood a flight attendant, whose name tag read, James. "Good afternoon, Dr. Montgomery," he greeted her warmly. "Welcome aboard. Your seat is 2A, just to your right." Gabrielle thanked him and moved into the first-class cabin, finding her window seat and stowing her carry-on in the overhead bin. The leather seat welcomed her with familiar comfort as she settled in, placing her tablet in the side pocket. Around her, the cabin filled with other passengers, a South Asian business executive arranging documents in 1D, an elderly white couple taking seats 3E and 3F, a young black woman in designer casual wear claiming 4A. The diversity of the premium cabin was no longer unusual, but expected another sign of the industry's evolution. As pre-departure preparations continued, a woman's voice came over the intercom. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Letitia Morales from the flight deck. On behalf of myself, First Officer Eric Thompson, and our entire crew, welcome aboard Transcontinental Airways Flight 847 to London Heathrow." The captain continued with standard flight information route weather flying time before adding something less routine. "We have a special passenger with us today. 2 years ago, Dr. Gabrielle Montgomery experienced an incident on this very route that led to significant positive changes throughout commercial aviation. Dr. Montgomery, on behalf of Transcontinental Airways and aviation professionals everywhere, thank you for your courage and leadership in transforming our industry for the better." Gabrielle hadn't expected this public acknowledgement and felt a mixture of surprise, appreciation, and slight embarrassment as several passengers glanced her way with expressions of recognition and respect. She responded with a modest nod, maintaining the composed dignity that had characterized her approach throughout the past 2 years. As the cabin crew completed final preparations, James approached her seat. "Dr. Montgomery, Captain Morales asked if you might visit the flight deck before departure. Completely optional, of course." "I'd be happy to," Gabrielle replied, rising from her seat. James escorted her to the cockpit where Captain Morales turned from her pre-flight checks with a warm smile. "Dr. Montgomery, thank you for coming up. I wanted to welcome you personally." "Thank you," Captain Gabrielle replied, shaking the offered hand. "I appreciate your kind words over the intercom, though they weren't necessary." "They were entirely necessary," Morales countered. "What happened on that flight 2 years ago needed to be acknowledged not just as an unfortunate incident, but as a catalyst for meaningful change." First Officer Thompson, a young white man with a respectful demeanor, added his perspective. "The standards implemented after your investigation have transformed how we operate, Dr. Montgomery. They've created clearer expectations and better accountability for everyone." "I'm glad to hear that," Gabrielle said sincerely. "The changes go beyond policies and procedures," Morales continued. "They've shifted how we think about our responsibilities to passengers and to each other. Authority in aviation is essential for safety, but it must be exercised based on operational requirements, not personal biases or assumptions about who belongs where." As they spoke, Gabrielle observed the easy professionalism between Morales and Thompson, the mutual respect and clear communication that characterized effective flight deck operations. This was aviation authority, as it should function based on expertise and role clarity rather than unchallenged personal judgment. "I should let you continue your preparations," Gabrielle said after a few minutes of conversation. "Thank you for welcoming me aboard." "Our privilege," Morales assured her. "Have a restful flight, Dr. Montgomery." Returning to her seat, Gabrielle found a glass of water waiting for her, along with a handwritten note from James. "Thank you for making the skies more welcoming for all of us." This simple acknowledgement from a flight attendant who had likely experienced his own challenges in an industry that hadn't always valued diversity touched Gabrielle deeply. The investigation and resulting standards hadn't been about creating special treatment for anyone. They had been about ensuring equal dignity for everyone, passengers and crew members alike. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate and began taxiing toward the runway, Gabrielle gazed out the window at O'Hare's vast operational landscape. Ground crews directed aircraft fuel trucks serviced waiting planes. Baggage handlers loaded cargo holds, all part of the complex choreography that made commercial aviation possible. The safety of this system had always depended on technical excellence and operational precision. But the investigation had highlighted another essential aspect of aviation safety: the human environment in which decisions were made. When bias influenced those decisions, it introduced unpredictability and risk. When reporting concerns led to retaliation, it undermined the open communication essential for safe operations. When some passengers or crew members were treated as if they didn't belong, it compromised the cooperative atmosphere necessary for effective emergency response. The standards implemented over the past 2 years had addressed these human factors directly, recognizing that true safety encompassed not just mechanical systems and operational procedures, but also the culture in which aviation professionals worked and passengers traveled. As Flight 847 accelerated down the runway and lifted into the afternoon sky, Gabrielle felt a sense of completion that had eluded her until now. The investigation had led to significant industry changes and her own career advancement, but this moment, returning to the same route where it all began, experiencing the transformed environment firsthand, provided a different kind of resolution. The flight proceeded smoothly across the Atlantic. Gabrielle worked for a while on preparations for upcoming regulatory reviews, before eventually reclining her seat into its flatbed position for some much-needed rest. The familiar white noise of the aircraft in cruise lulled her toward sleep as her mind drifted through memories of the past 2 years. She thought of Alexander Reynolds, whose discriminatory action had inadvertently triggered an industry transformation he could never have anticipated. Last she'd heard, he was working with an aviation consultancy specializing in operational safety, a field where his technical expertise remained valuable despite the end of his flying career. She thought of Lucia Hernandez, now Transcontinental's Director of Service Standards, whose courage in reporting discrimination despite personal consequences had helped establish the pattern that justified broader investigation. Lucia had transformed her own painful experience into a platform for positive change, developing training programs and accountability systems now used throughout the industry. She thought of Richard Palmer, who had initially approached the incident as a PR crisis to be managed, but ultimately recognized it as a fundamental challenge requiring institutional transformation. His decision to step aside for new leadership had demonstrated a rare understanding that creating meaningful change sometimes required breaking with past practices and perspectives. And she thought of the countless passengers who had shared their own experiences of discrimination after the incident became public, people who had previously remained silent because they didn't believe reporting would make any difference. Their collective voices had helped establish that what happened on Flight 847 wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a pattern that required institutional response. As Gabrielle drifted toward sleep, the aircraft continued its journey eastward, carrying its diverse complement of passengers toward London. In the cockpit, Captain Morales and First Officer Thompson monitored systems and communications, making routine adjustments to maintain the optimal course and altitude. In the cabin, flight attendants attended to passenger needs with professional courtesy. All standard aviation operations conducted with the technical excellence and human dignity that characterized air travel at its best. 2 years earlier on this same route, Gabrielle Montgomery had experienced discrimination that revealed deep flaws in how the industry operated. Today, she was experiencing the transformed environment that had emerged from addressing those flaws, not perfect, still evolving, but fundamentally changed for the better. Sometimes, the most significant changes began with the simplest acts of resistance, like refusing to give up a seat you had every right to occupy. And sometimes, those changes extended far beyond what anyone involved could have initially imagined. The morning sun filtered through London's characteristic haze as Flight 847 began its final approach to Heathrow. Gabrielle had awakened refreshed after several hours of solid sleep, her seat once again upright as the aircraft descended through scattered clouds. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final approach into London Heathrow," Captain Morales announced. Local time is 7:42 a.m. and the weather is partly cloudy with a temperature of 16 degrees Celsius. On behalf of First Officer Thompson and our entire crew, thank you for flying with Transcontinental Airways. As the aircraft banked gently toward its assigned runway, Gabrielle gazed out at the sprawling metropolis below. London had been her professional home for nearly 5 years now, first as an FAA inspector based in the international office, then as a lead investigator, and now as Deputy Administrator for Aviation Safety and Civil Rights. Each role had built upon the previous one, creating a career trajectory she couldn't have anticipated when she first joined the agency. The landing was smooth, a gentle touchdown followed by the reassuring reverse thrust of engines as the aircraft decelerated along the runway. As they taxied toward the terminal, Gabrielle gathered her belongings, preparing for the transition from air travel to ground transportation. When the seatbelt sign finally chimed off, she stood and retrieved her carry-on from the overhead bin. James, the flight attendant, approached with a warm smile. "Dr. Montgomery, Captain Morales, asked me to give you this." He handed her an envelope. Inside was a handwritten note on Transcontinental Airways stationery. "Dr. Montgomery, 2 years ago I stepped into a situation created by someone else's failure of judgment. Today I had the privilege of completing the circle by flying you safely to London on the same route where it all began. The changes you helped implement have made commercial aviation better, not just for passengers, but for all of us who make our careers in the sky. Equal dignity isn't just a moral imperative, it's essential to the safety and integrity of our operations. Thank you for your courage, determination, and vision. With sincere appreciation, Captain Leticia Morales." Gabrielle tucked the note into her jacket pocket, touched by this personal acknowledgement from a professional who understood both the technical and human dimensions of aviation safety. As she made her way through the familiar corridors of Heathrow, Gabrielle reflected on the full-circle journey she had just completed. 2 years ago, she had arrived at this same terminal after a flight that had challenged her dignity but ultimately transformed an industry. Today, she arrived after experiencing the results of that transformation, not perfect, still evolving but meaningfully different from what had come before. Outside the terminal, her regular driver waited with a sign bearing her name. "Good morning, Dr. Montgomery," he greeted her. "Welcome back to London." "Thank you, Michael," she replied, settling into the car for the journey to her flat in Kensington. As they navigated London's morning traffic, Gabrielle checked messages on her phone. Among them was a news alert about Alexander Reynolds. He had given an interview to an aviation journal discussing his current work as a safety consultant. With some trepidation, she opened the article, curious about Reynolds' current perspective. The interview focused primarily on technical aspects of his consulting work. But near the end, the interviewer had raised the inevitable question about the incident that had ended his flying career. Reynolds' response was notably measured. "That situation required me to reevaluate many assumptions I'd never previously questioned. While I still believe my actions were motivated by security concerns rather than conscious bias, I've come to understand that the impact of our decisions matters more than our intentions. The industry changes that followed have created clearer standards and better accountability for everyone involved in commercial aviation. This wasn't a full acknowledgement of personal responsibility, but it represented significant evolution from his initial defensive posture. Reynolds had moved from angry denial to reluctant acceptance to pragmatic recognition that the industry needed to change with the times, even if he still struggled to fully acknowledge his own role in necessitating that change. In a way, Reynolds' journey mirrored the industry's not a perfect transformation driven by sudden enlightenment, but a gradual evolution shaped by practical realities and external pressures. The new standards didn't require everyone to achieve perfect understanding or agreement. They required systems that worked effectively regardless of individual attitudes. Systems that established clear expectations, consistent accountability, and meaningful consequences. As the car approached her building, Gabrielle received another message, this one from Victoria Ramirez. Transcontinental's CEO Morales informed me you were on today's 847. Hope the experience demonstrated positive change in action. Would value your candid assessment when convenient. Gabrielle made a mental note to respond later with her observations about the flight. The professional crew, interactions, the diversity of the premium cabin, the absence of the subtle scrutiny and questioning that had once been routine for passengers who didn't fit certain expectations. After arriving at her flat and unpacking, Gabrielle took a moment to stand by the window overlooking the London cityscape. The past 2 years had been a whirlwind of investigation, advocacy, policy development, and implementation monitoring. She had become somewhat reluctantly the public face of industry reform, testifying before congressional committees, speaking at international conferences, consulting with airlines, implementing the new standards. Throughout it all, she had maintained the same composed determination that had characterized her response when Reynolds first challenged her presence in Seat 2A. Not angry confrontation or public denunciation, but steady insistence on addressing the institutional failures that had enabled his behavior. That approach had proven remarkably effective. By focusing on systems rather than individuals, on patterns rather than isolated incidents, on institutional accountability rather than personal blame, she had helped create changes that extended far beyond one flight or one airline. Commercial aviation had begun to transform how it addressed discrimination, not just through revised policies and procedures, but through fundamental shifts in corporate culture and industry standards. Airlines that had initially resisted the changes now highlighted their commitment to passenger dignity in marketing materials. Aviation training programs incorporated bias awareness alongside technical skills. Industry associations shared best practices for creating inclusive environments, both in the air and on the ground. As Gabrielle prepared for a well-deserved day of rest before returning to her regular duties, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The work wasn't finished. Implementation continued to vary across carriers. Incidents still occurred. Vigilance remained necessary. But something fundamental had shifted in how the industry operated, and she had helped make that shift possible. Alexander Reynolds had thought he was removing a passenger who didn't belong in his first-class cabin. Instead, he had inadvertently catalyzed changes that would transform how the entire industry operated, not just in premium cabins, but throughout the shared spaces of commercial aviation. Sometimes the most significant changes began with the simplest acts of resistance, like refusing to give up a seat you had every right to occupy. And sometimes those changes extended far beyond what anyone involved could have initially imagined. What did you think of Dr. Montgomery's powerful stand against discrimination? Have you ever witnessed or experienced unfair treatment while traveling? This story shows how one person's courage can transform an entire industry and create lasting change. If you found this story inspiring, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of justice and transformation. Share this video with friends and family who believe in equal dignity for everyone. Drop a comment below with your thoughts or experiences. Your voice matters in this ongoing conversation about creating a more just world. Remember, sometimes the most powerful act of resistance is simply standing firm in the space you rightfully occupy.